Hello and welcome back to my studio. I'm Kara of Ladyfoxstitches. I'm a long arm quilter located in northern Nevada. Today I'm going to show you my exact process for sewing on a quilt binding by machine. I'm super excited. Let's get started. There are a few important items of business I'd like to cover really quick before we move over to the sewing machine. First of all, I recognize that there are many ways a binding can be attached to a quilt. This just happens to be the method I use, and I offer this service to my customers. So if someone wants a quilt completely finished when they receive it back from me, this is the exact process I use. There are a few tools that I use while I bind a quilt that I think are really important, and you'll see me use them over on the sewing machine. The first one is a stiletto. This is a nice sharp tool that comes to a nice fine point where I can get close into the needle and the presser foot without the risk of sewing over my fingers. So I definitely use this when I sew on bindings. I also use Taylor Seville magic clips. This one is in the size small, and I really like these clips because they have a super strong clamp. The spring in them is nice and strong. They don't move around and shift on you. It also has a super low profile, so I can actually leave this attached to the quilt if needed, and it can pass under my presser foot without getting in the way or with the risk of being sewn on. So these are a must-have tool while I bind a quilt. You'll also see me use Dritz extra fine glass head pins. These are little straight pins that I use when I quilt and bind. They are nice and fine and sharp, and so they pin very accurately, but I also can use my iron over the top of them. They won't melt or anything like that. So they are resistant to ironing, and that's important to me as I bind my quilts. Today I'm going to be binding my Indelible quilt, and I'm using a binding that is 2.5 inches wide that has been sewn together. The strips have been sewn together on a diagonal, the seams have been pressed open, and then the whole thing is pressed in half. This is a pretty standard binding. Like I said, it's 2.5 inches wide, folded in half and pressed nicely. I like to fold up my binding, let me show you, kind of in a stack like this. I don't like to wind my binding onto anything. I don't like it to unwind, as it comes off something and it twists while I'm trying to sew it. So I just leave it folded like this, and I'll set it next to my sewing machine while I'm attaching it to the quilt. This is a super slow process. It's faster than sewing by hand, but it's definitely a process that slows me down. I like to sew just a few inches at a time, adjusting all the time, making sure that my quilt is not pulling to the side or anything like that. I'm very careful as I go around the quilt, so you'll see me just take my time and sew little bits at a time, but I promise it'll add up, and pretty soon you'll have a finished bound quilt. Let's jump over to the sewing machine now. Okay, I'm over at my sewing machine, and before I get started sewing, I did want to make sure you knew that I have trimmed my quilt corners so they are as square as possible. I used a quilting ruler where I just lined it up like this and made sure I cut these corners nice and square. That really is important if you want your corners of your binding to look really sharp and nice. So make sure your quilt corners are trimmed to 90 degrees. Today I'm sewing on a Bernina 750 sewing machine, and I am using it's a standard presser foot. It's the 1D for Bernina. I use this foot because from the center of the foot to the edge is 3/8 inch. It's a little bit wider than our quilter's 1/4 inch that we often use. I'm going to sew my binding on using a seam allowance that is between 3/8 inch, which is from the center to the edge of the foot, and a 1/4 inch. To do that on my machine, I am going to move my needle 1 click to the right. So I just move it over like that. Let me show you again. There it is in the center, and I just click it over there. That means that my seam allowance, when I go to sew my binding on, it will actually be 5/16 of an inch. And that makes it so that once the binding has been flipped over to the back side and sewn down, it's a nice tight small binding, but it also leaves just enough room to stitch that binding down by machine. So that's it. That is one thing that I definitely do every time I sew with a 5/16 seam allowance, and that I do that by just moving my needle over 1 click from the standard position using the standard presser foot. I start my bindings on the side or the bottom of my quilt about, I don't want to start at the corner, so I'm just going to move my quilt down just a little bit, and I'm going to leave a tail probably, I don't know, a foot long or so, and I'm going to just line up my binding here at the edge of my quilt. I'm going to arrange that under my presser foot and get that situated. Now remember, my needle has been shifted 1 click to the right, and so here we go. I'm going to back stitch just a little bit here at the beginning so that those stitches don't pull, and I'm making sure that my quilt is not falling off the edge of the table or getting caught up on anything. That's very important to keep our stitch line nice and straight. I don't use a walking foot. I just use my standard presser foot because I feel like I have more control. I can see better. I just am more familiar with it. But I do sometimes get a little bubble of fabric right here because, you know, the under layers are going through a little bit faster. And I use my stiletto to just kind of ease that extra fullness in under the presser foot as I stitch around. I don't want any gathers if possible or any tucks. I'm just easing that extra fullness in 1 inch at a time. I don't pin or anything. I like the flexibility of being able to just kind of maneuver my fabric however I feel like it needs to be maneuvered, and pinning oftentimes keeps me from having that flexibility, at least in this step of things. Keep hitting the camera, I'm sorry guys. Nice and easy, making sure that quilt is not pulling. And yes, it's a little awkward and there is some pulling, but I'm just trying to maintain control of it all the time. Get nice and easy. I'm using a microtext Schmetz needle in size 80/20. I'm just using standard thread, nothing extra special. good quality though. Coming up here on a seam in the binding, no big deal. I'm keeping this lined up right on the edge of my presser foot. Okay, we're coming up on a corner here, and you're going to see me stop at the seam allowance width away from this bottom edge right here. This edge of the quilt, I'm going to be stopping that same seam allowance from there. And I do have a mark on my stitch plate that I am following. If you need to, you can measure it and mark it with a pin or a pen, either way. And I'm just going to get right there, and then I'm going to do a couple back stitches, and then I will cut my threads here. Okay. So then with this corner, I do a pretty standard mitered corner. You're going to see me fold it back like this. So let me get my stiletto here. So you can see that I have a 45-degree angle right here. This bottom part of the binding is going to be parallel with this next quilt side. And when I get that lined up, I'm going to fold it over itself. And there's a fold right here that I want to line up with this edge right here. So I'm going to get that situated, and I'm going to stick a pin through those layers just like that. I use a pin right here because it has a very low profile and it will not get in the way of my presser foot when I turn it like this. And now we're going to sew down this side. I just start at the very corner of the quilt, and I don't backstitch on this one, and then we're off and on our way. Okay, I'm making sure that everything's lined up against that edge of the presser foot. I'm going to stop here, pull out that pin, get that out of the way. Then I don't worry about poking myself accidentally later. Making sure I'm easing any extra fullness in that binding. I'm also making sure not to pull on my binding at all. I don't want this to stretch, so I'm letting it just feed in naturally as best I can. My stitch length is set to 2.5 on my Bernina. It's a very average stitch length. Constantly kind of arranging the quilt to make sure it's not pulling to the side or anything. The bigger the quilt, the more likely it is to kind of want to hang heavy off the side of your table or something. Okay, here we are coming up to a corner again. Nice and easy. I'm going to stop that seam allowance width from the edge. Let's see, maybe one more stitch. There we go. Back stitch a little bit. And trim my threads. Okay, again right here, we're going to fold back the 45-degree angle, making sure this line right here is parallel. Just a little finger press there. Fold it back over itself. The folded edge is going to line up right along that edge. And I'll stick a pin in there just to hold it until I get started here. I'm going to start right at the edge, or right at the corner, holding my threads. I don't backstitch. Okay, I'm going to remove that pin. I don't need it anymore. I do have my sewing machine set with the needle down, so when it stops, that needle stays in place. So I think that's a really handy feature to use while binding. Slow and steady wins this race. It's actually not a race, but slow and steady will get you around in no time. Again, I'm trying to be very careful with how much I'm pulling on that binding. I don't want that to stretch at all. Okay, we're at the third corner. I'm going to do the same thing we did on the other two. Just going to stitch up until we hit that mark, the seam allowance. Maybe one more. Back stitch. And cut my threads. Okay, one more time, or well, I guess this is the third time around. We're going to fold that binding back, creating a 45-degree angle parallel along this bottom. Fold it over itself, so it still has that 45-degree angle under there. And the fabric fold is that binding. The fold on the binding is just right there, parallel with that edge. Stick a pin in there to hold it. Starting right at the edge of the corner and going. Removing that pin. Okay, my quilt's a little bit twisted here. Straightening that out. Trying to be as accurate as I can be with that edge right here. Making sure everything is lined up as best as I can. I am human after all. But taking it nice and easy, an inch at a time, really makes it manageable. Tucking in any extra fullness on that top layer of fabric. I think this fabric in the binding I think the fabric that the binding is made out of is really so pretty. I think it's perfect for this quilt. I had just enough to make a binding here for this particular quilt. Yeah, it was a fabric that was in my stash. I'm not too worried about any of these strings. They will be tucked into the binding when we roll it over, so no big deal. Or they can be trimmed if they really are getting kind of crazy. I am being careful not to get my stiletto under the presser foot so far that it touches or gets close to the needle. I do pull it out before it goes all the way under there. I've done this many, many times, and so I feel really comfortable manipulating the fabric and tools in this way. Okay, here's our fourth corner. Just gonna watch that. Okay, back stitch. Okay, here we are on our fourth corner. We're going to pull that over. We have a 45-degree angle. This is the bottom of the binding here, this raw edge of the binding is parallel to that other edge. Fold it over. The folded edge is parallel to that edge now. And we pin it in place. Oh, excuse me. There we go. The camera is right in front of me, so it's easy to hit. Okay, I'm starting right at the edge. Oh, quilt is pulling. Okay, I'm getting close to where I started my binding, and I want to make sure I leave a gap. So I'm just going to stitch a few more inches here, and then I'm going to back stitch, and I'll cut my threads. And remove that pin. Okay, now we've got to bring the ends of the binding together. So I'm going to take the camera over to the ironing board and I'll show you it from there. Okay, I'm over at my ironing board. You can see the tails of my binding here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to line up these edges here. I'm going to just kind of fold back that tail, and then take this one, line it up on the edge. I'm actually going to move it down a little. So I'm just folding it down like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring them together, those folds, leaving an 1/8 inch gap between them. Okay, so they're just folded back on themselves like this. I don't know why this works, this method works, but I promise it does. So I leave an 1/8 inch gap, and I'm just going to pin these down in place. Make sure, oh, I need a little bit more gap. Okay, we have an 1/8 inch between the two of them. I'm going to take my iron and put it right on that. Give it a good press. And because those pins are glass headed, I can put the iron right on them, no problem. Okay, and so we have this pinned in place like this with this little gap. I'm going to let that cool just a little bit, and we're going to head back over to the sewing machine. Okay, I'm back at my sewing machine. I've still got my pins in. I've got that little gap between the tails. And before I forget, I need to move my needle back to the center for this next step. So I'm just going to do that. One click over, it's back in the center. Now that this is a little bit cooled from the iron, I'm going to remove those pins. And we're going to sew these ends together. We're going to take the top one here very first. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to clip, I'm going to just kind of make a little fold here in the quilt just to help keep it from pulling. And I'm going to add one of these magic clips right there just to hold it. Okay, this top piece I'm going to open up, right side up, and I have this pressed mark. There's this like X marks the spot, right, from where we pressed, and I can see that there. And then I'm going to open up I'm going to take the bottom one, and I'm just going to open it up like this so that the right side is facing down, and I'm going to line up that X marks the spot between the two pieces, just like so. I'm just going to check to make sure that's lined up. So I've got that pressed mark lined up, right sides together, and I'm going to throw a few pins in here to help me hold it. Just like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew from this corner through to the center down to this corner here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is right sides together. Needle is in the center. And I don't need to draw this line. I'm going to eyeball it, but you may want to draw a line from corner to corner. Just corner to corner. I don't backstitch on this part. Grab my snips. Okay, now what we're going to do is remove those pins. Trim these strings. Okay, now before I go ahead and cut this and trim that seam, I want to double check to make sure it fits. So I just unclip the quilt, and I'm going to lay it out here, and as you can see, this piece is looking just like it's supposed to. It has that 45-degree seam, and it lays nice and flat along the edge of that quilt. So what I'm going to do, open that back up. Definitely check to make sure this is correct before you cut this seam. And I'm just going to use my scissors. Oh, about 1/4 inch. Like this. And then I'm going to finger press this open. You can take it back over to the iron and press that open if that makes you more comfortable. I'm just going to give that a good finger press. Nice. And then I fold it, making sure that seam stays pressed open. And now I can stitch down the rest of this seam here, and it fits perfectly with no, you can't tell where I started or stopped. So I'm going to move my needle back one click to the right, and we're going to just stitch the rest of that down. Perfect. Again, I can use my stiletto if I need. Just like so. Making sure that edge is lined up really nicely. And now you can see where I started. I'm just going to connect those. And that's one whole side ready to go. So we've got it stitched all the way around the edges. Trim these strings. And all of our corners are going to look like this. And we are ready to flip it over and do the other side. Okay, I've got my quilt flipped over. My binding is underneath here. You can see, so this is my backing fabric. I'm using a thread color that actually matches the quilting thread. It doesn't match the binding thread, and I'm okay with that because this is going to be on the back of the quilt, and I want my stitch line to match the quilting and not stand out and be a different color. So that's why I've chosen the color of thread I have. Of course, you can do whatever color you'd like. So I'm going to start again on the side of the quilt or the bottom. This happens to be the side of the quilt, and I just pick a random spot to start, and I'm going to pull that binding fabric out like this. And before I jump in too far, I do want to point out that we can see right here, this is the stitch line where we stitch the binding down on the other side. And that is a really important line that we're going to pay attention to as we sew this binding down. So I flip this binding out, and I'm going to wrap it around, pulling it nice and tight. I don't want to curl this up inside, but I do want it pulled nice and tight and flush against it. And this is where magic clips come in very handy. And magic clips, as you can see here, have a top and a bottom. The top side has these little markings. The bottom side has no marking. The bottom side has a smaller piece here. The top is quite a bit larger. So I want this right side up. Again, I fold this over, and I'm just going to use this clip to hold it in place like that. And then I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to put another one. Oops, those are connected. Do the same thing, right side up. And this is a few inches apart, but I do that so it can hold it and I don't have to worry about pulling that piece over while I'm getting started. So I'm going to arrange my presser foot into the middle of these clips here. And before I forget, I need to move my needle to the center, back to the center this time around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my presser foot down. And I am very familiar with my machine. I know exactly where that needle is going to hit on that fabric in there. And so I'm watching right, oh, I got a lot of fuzz in there. I'm watching this little marking on the foot, and I'm going to make sure that the edge of my binding is just hitting to the left of that line, barely, barely. And I know that if I do that, my needle will hit this fabric and will be on the binding, but will be on the left side of this stitch line. So I want my needle to land between the edge of the binding and this stitch line here. And that way we're catching this binding, but we're not catching it on the front side. And these binding clips are just helping me hold as I get started. And as I start on this part, I do not backstitch. I leave these, well, I'm going to leave this first clip in place. Take a couple stitches. It's holding it now for me. I can remove that. Make sure my quilt is not pulling at all. This is very important. I'm going to leave this clip in back here to just keep it from pulling on my stitches. And I'm going to just manipulate that binding, stitching right on the edge, just as close as I can get. I'm going to tuck in any of these kind of threads that I come across. I'm just going to tuck them inside that binding. And I'm just going an inch or so, and I adjust. And then I pull and wrap. Again, I'm not folding this seam here. I'm not folding it up inside the binding. I'm leaving it flat, but I am tucking that binding nice and tight against it. And I'm keeping my eye right there where that needle is going to hit the edge of that fabric. I'm watching that kind of marking on my foot really closely. I'm not worried about what's happening over here at all. I'm only worried about where that needle is. And again, I'm keeping the stitch line between this line where we first sewed on the binding and the edge of the binding, or the fold of that binding. Just like this. And we're just going to work our way around each side in this manner, working nice and easy, manipulating the fabric an inch at a time. As you practice on your sewing machine, you'll learn where that needle hits. You'll become very familiar with it, and you can kind of watch in relation to maybe markings on your foot or something like that, and you're going to be able to know exactly where you need to line up things. So you have this perfect stitch. This is important not to let the quilt pull at all, because if I stop with the needle down and the quilt is pulling, it will shift and kind of make a jog in your stitch. So we do not want that to happen if we can help it. Again, we're human, and that's okay. It's okay that it's not, you know, AI perfect or anything. We're making our way down the whole side of the quilt here. And I know I've said a lot of times over and over to go slow, take it easy, lining everything up, but it does get, you will get faster at it the more you do it. It's not completely as slow as a turtle. Just nice and easy. It's not a race. Again, I'm manipulating the quilt so it doesn't pull or tug, if I can help it. Tucking in all those stray threads. Stray threads are everywhere if you're a quilter. They're all over our clothes and the floor and on everything. Now I know you can't see the stitch line really on the other side, but it's looking very nice. And when we get finished, I'll be sure to show you up close just exactly how good that's looking. I just don't want to take my needle out or take the quilt out from under my needle if I don't need to. Again, I'm watching that stitch line under here, making sure my needle is not hitting it. I'm just to the left of this stitch line, and then just on the binding side of that fold. I'm just manipulating an inch or two at a time. I know I keep saying that. Okay, I'm getting about 4 or 5 inches from the corner, so I'm going to stop right there, leaving my needle down, and I'm going to stop for a second, and I'm going to work with this edge here. Something about bindings that I want to talk about. This is really important to my method. I think it works really good, and I think I've not heard it talked about much, so I'm going to go ahead and share kind of my thought process here with these corners. I want this corner to lie as flat as possible, and I want to reduce the bulk in this corner a lot because we do have all those extra folds in there to get that mitered corner. So I just want you to notice that this mitered corner here, this is the front of the quilt, I can stick my stiletto in like this, and I call this the corner nostril. It has a little nostril. You can kind of pick it with your stiletto here, right? And it's going this way. On the other side of the quilt, I want my nostril to be going the other way. So in order to get that to work, I'm going to take a few more stitches here really quick so I can get it better in the camera. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually fold this bottom edge up first. I'm going to grab some of my magic clips, and I'm just going to have it be extra hands. These little clips are going to just hold it for me there, just like that. And then I'm going to take my stiletto here, and I'm going to kind of manipulate this fabric over all the way past the edge, and then I'm going to fold that edge back in. And I want this corner here to meet this edge here, just past this stitching line. So I'm just going to kind of make sure that that can happen and it lines up good. I'm going to use my stiletto to kind of hold it so I can see what it's going to do. I can use that to really fold that corner in. And again, my nostril now is going this way, opposite of the one under it. So I've got it right where I want it, and so I can take one of these magic clips, top side up, and I'm going to just pop it right here on the corner to hold it for me, just like that. And now I'm going to continue on this stitch line, making sure I'm avoiding the binding on the front side. And I use my stiletto here because my fingers are just a little too squatty. And I'm just going to watch that needle. We're going to get right in the corner and stop just like that with the needle down. Lift my presser foot, and we're going to pivot here. Okay, I'm going to remove this corner one because the needle is holding it. Put my foot down, and I can see this middle of the foot is lining up just to the right of that fold. Oops, I hit a button. Let's try that. Let's put the needle down again. There we go. That needle is hitting that fabric, and it's just on the edge of that binding. I can remove the clips as I go, because I would rather use my fingers to hold everything, because like I said, I feel like I can manipulate it better. I can feel what's happening in there, making sure this is laying flat, fold it over tight, and stitch. Okay, maybe I can show you now here. So if I pull that side we just did, you can see the stitch line. This is a gray thread. Look how nice and tidy right along that edge. It looks so nice because we're just taking it nice and easy, inch or two at a time, right as close as we can get. And then if I flip it over to the front side, you can see this is the quilting up here, but this, let's see if we can get that camera to focus. Let me get my pointer stick here. So here is our stitching line. You can see it nice and strong. There we go. Right along the edge of the binding. We're not hitting the binding, it's on the quilt, and that stitch line actually to me blends in with the quilting. So I don't mind being able to see it like that, but we want that line to be just as nice and tidy as we can so that it's pleasing to the eye, and we want it close to the binding, not on it, and not too far out here. So that's why I make that seam allowance the first time around what I call the 5/16 seam allowance that's inside here. So hopefully that gives you a good view of what is happening as we are stitching. Looks really nice and tidy. And this is rolled really nice and tight. That binding is all the way filled with the edge of the quilt in there. Okay, we can keep going. If we get a little further, I'll show you the corner that we just did. It's always important to keep that quilt from pulling off to the side. It's going on nice and easy. I've got a bunch of strings here to tuck in. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and do the next corner. Because of the nostril, and I know which way it's going because I've done it a million times, it's going this way. I want the top one, or this other one, to go the other way. So I know I have to tuck up the bottom edge here first. Just going to clip it in a couple places, those extra hands. So it holds in place, good. And tuck that edge in and pull it up over. Grab another clip for the corner there, making sure it stays out of the way of where the needle's going to hit. We don't want to hit metal, obviously. Okay, and I'm going to get my stiletto to help kind of hold that just and guide it right into place. Nice and easy. And I'm going to stop once I get to that, just like that. Take a stitch or two. And I'm going to remove these. The perfect corner. Okay, let's take a look at that first corner we did. Oh, we've got strings hanging out everywhere. Let me trim them. Okay. So if we look here, this is where we've stitched down that first corner. It just comes right along the edge. So when we come down this way, we know to stop right in that stitch line path, right here in the corner. And then we pivot. So let me show you that what I'm talking about, the nostrils. So if we take a look here, there's a nostril, the corner nostril. I see it right here and it goes this way. And on this side, we want it to go in this way. And that way it just reduces the bulk in there. So nothing's doubled up. There's a little bulk on this side and a little bulk on this side, and it lays much flatter. So that's looking really, really nice. Let's keep going. Some of my process feels hard to explain, but hopefully with the video you can see kind of what I'm talking about. Just a reminder, we're watching this line right here. We want to make sure our needle is just to the left of that and it's hitting just as close to that edge as we can get without going off. So I'm watching where this fold lines up with this marking on my foot, which is the center of my needle. So that edge of this fabric is just hitting to the left of that mark. And that's how I know it's in the right spot. But yet this stitch line is coming on this side of the mark. I'm not worried at all about what's happening right here on this side of the foot. I definitely worried about that on the other side, but not now. I'm manipulating that quilt, keeping it from pulling as best as I can. Tucking in any loose threads. Not loose threads, but kind of those fraying threads off the edge of the quilt. Lots of threads right there. Let me trim those. Okay, I'm going to pause again right about there and do the next corner. These clips are so awesome because they really are like having extra pair of hands. Extra pair of hands, extra set of hands. Okay. Let's see which way that's folded. Perfect, I think. Again, I use my stiletto to kind of poke and hold because my fingers are a little stubby. and I don't want to sew over them. Okay, I might have gone one stitch too many on this one. Can't quite tell. Oh, it looks about right. Here we go. Nice. Okay. I think I dropped my snips. It's okay. We'll use my scissors. I love my Ginger scissors. I have a couple pairs and I was able to send them in and get them sharpened. So that makes me pretty happy. I do use tiny little Kai, I think they're 4-inch scissors or snips or something. I keep them for just cutting strings and stuff. But I do love my Ginger scissors. Oh, I hit the camera again. Easy to do when it's right in front of you. This is coming together very nicely. The more accurate each of your steps are, the better result in the end. It's kind of like a 1% slope increase when we do each little step just the best we can. So that starts with accurate cutting and pressing, accurate seam allowances. And again, all that stuff just takes practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Over the years, I've really kind of played around with this method to get just the right amount of overlap and thickness. I do this exact method on quilts with Minky. It feels like it ought to be a little thicker or something, but it still seems to work. When I really want my thread color to match the binding, so it won't match the quilting thread color, I actually sew the binding onto the back of the quilt first, and then the top stitch on the binding will actually be on the front of the quilt, because I'd rather it match on the front than have a strange parallel stitching line in a different color. This way, that parallel line actually matches the quilting thread, and I think it blends just beautifully. So it's all preference, kind of what you want. And at my house, there are no quilting pulleys, so you can do it however you want with whatever color of thread you want. Okay, I'm going to use my clips again. This is our last corner. Tuck in some threads or trim them or something. Get them out of the way. Again, I know which way that nostril is going. It's going this way. Next time you're around a quilt, you should look at the corners and see if they have opposite nostrils or if it looks like an actual nose with nostrils going the same direction. And I promise if we do our nostrils opposite, it will lay a lot flatter and it will come to that nice mitered corner so beautifully. Helps a lot. Okay, I'm being very careful how far I'm going. Let me move that one. Okay, it wants to pull. There we go. Okay. Kind of get situated. Remove those clips. Okay, we're coming around to where we began. Oh, crunch. And that clip is still hanging on there after being kind of tossed about. Okay, I'm going to undo that. Right down here is where we started. There's no back stitching because I want as little buildup of thread as possible. I'm just going to trim these threads down so they're out of the way. And I'll overstitch just a few stitches and then I'll back stitch. That way we don't have extra thread buildup, more than we need. But we'll have just the right amount. We meet those seams or stitch lines. And look at that. It's all done. Just going to trim those threads really quick. Okay, look at this beautiful binding. Looks really good. And there's that tiny little parallel stitch line across there. Okay, let's take the camera over and we'll get some better angles of our stitching. Okay, I'm going to hold the camera and take it in a little closer. I'm going to show you the corners first. Try not to make you too seasick. So you can see the front side on this corner here and this corner here. This one, the stitch line gets a little close to the binding, but we still avoid it. You can see that there. It's a little bit wider right here compared to right in the corner, but I think that's okay. And then you can see on the back side that stitch line all the way here, where we pivot, come down to the next one, and here's another corner. And our nice mitered edges look fabulous. And again, that nostril, I mean, if you look at it kind of head on, it's not a nose, right? There's a nostril that goes this way, and then there's a nostril that comes down on the other side. And that's exactly what we want. Opposite corner nostrils. It's so funny to say, but I tell you, it works to keep that in my brain. And they lay so nice and flat. And then we can just kind of take a peek all the way up. Oh, we got strings that we'll have to trim, but that's okay. Strings always. Look how nice that stitch line is all the way across back. Here's the back on this side. And then of course on the front, get the lighting to show it. It's just runs parallel to the edge of the binding, but I think it blends in with the quilting perfectly. Again, there's that string we'll have to trim, but that's okay. So there's our binding, all nice and done. Excellent. Thanks for sticking around while I bound my Indelible quilt. This was a fun project. I'm glad I was able to share with you my method. I hope it was helpful, just at least to see kind of what I'm looking for, what I'm watching, what I'm lining up. So let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my website at ladyfoxstitches.com if you are interested in long arm quilting services or even binding services. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.